Toy Story. Mr. Potato Head. A potato-shaped toy. Design allows him to separate his detachable parts from his body. Idaho Potato Museum. Mr. Potato Head. 1949, Mr. Potato Head was invented and developed by George Lerner. George Lerner would often take potatoes from his mother's garden and, using various fruits and vegetables as facial features, he would make dolls for his younger sisters to play with. 1952, Mr. Potato Head was born on May 1st, 1952. The original toy cost 98 cents. The kit contained hands, feet, ears, 2 mouths, 2 pairs of eyes, 4 noses, 3 hats, eyeglasses, a pipe, and 8 felt pieces resembling facial hair. The original Mr. Potato Head did not include a potato body. Consumers provided their own potatoes to stick the various pieces into. Shortly after the Mr. Potato Head release, the kits grew in size to include an additional 50 pieces. April 30th, 1952, Mr. Potato Head became the first toy advertised on television. 1953, Mr. Potato Head grew and had a family which included Mrs. Potato Head. 1960s, the company was forced to include a plastic potato body. 1995, Mr. Potato Head made his debut in Hollywood. Digital Hub, U.S., SWNS Digital. Women spend $250,000 on their appearance in a lifetime. 2021. Women who said they routinely spend money on their appearance will shell out almost $250,000 throughout their lifetime. More than 1/4 of all appearance-related spending is on the face. American women spend nearly $250,000 on their appearance in their lifetime. The women surveyed who said they routinely spend money on their appearance spend an average of $313 a month. And despite their youthfulness, people in their 20s spend more on average on makeup than any other group. The real price of beauty in the U.S. 2020. The U.S. is the world's largest beauty market, accounting for 13% of a $532 billion industry worldwide. This is from Booksy.com. According to the same survey data, the average American woman will spend roughly $300,000 on face products alone in her lifetime. American women apply an average of 16 products to their face per day, from eye cream to serums to mascara, according to the same survey. When it comes to the price of beauty, American women spend an average of $115 for makeup and beauty treatments per month. American women spend on average $3,756 per year on beauty. Madame Noir. Black women spend $500 billion on hair care and weaves. Why? 2011. Black women spend $500 billion to keep our hairstyles tight, our weaves looking good, and our kitchens tamed. Evolved Teacher. Why Black women wear wigs and weaves. Weaves and wigs offer a lot of Black women an opportunity for versatility. Also, one thing that's rarely discussed is that for Black women who work in media or entertainment, we're often forced to cover our hair because hairstylists have not been trained to do Black hair. Lace front wigs empower Black women to break hair rules. R29 Body and Mind. This is from refinery29.com. Snatched is a week-long celebration of wigs, the people who wear them, and their role in Black beauty culture. Portia Weeks' fingers move at a lightning pace as she works her way around the day-glow wig before her. With ashen strands sprouting from its roots, slime green tips, and a slightly braided texture, there's a dystopian edge to it that feels like the hair arrived from the future. Anchored to a felt form, the unit appears to be suspended in air, as if it were levitating around this Brooklyn photo studio. Its raw, paper-thin lace front lightly fluttering under the breeze of vents above. From bubblegum pink finger waves to kaleidoscopic, knee-length mermaid hair, Weeks' creations hardly resemble the store-bought church lady coiffures you might have once associated with wigs. Her custom shade-matched lace fronts melt into the heads of those who wear them. I was a frontal nerd. I ate, breathed, and slept frontals. I thought about it before I went to sleep, and first thing when I woke up in the morning, how can I make this look more realistic? If you don't pluck it a certain way, it is going to look really, really crazy, like a monster. The skillful styling and application of lace fronts and glueless full lace wigs is a part of a radical hair shift in hair. Wiggery. $10 billion wig industry that relies on our patronage. Antebellum New Orleans. Free women of color. Intricate and eye-catching hairstyles which were often bedazzled with jewelry and feathers. Jewelry and feathers. Instagram and YouTube are the new beauty salon where women trade tricks. This growing acceptance has helped retire the age-old stigma around fake hair that has worked to undermine Black beauty and dismiss Black style. Instead, women are refreshingly open and honest about their wiggery or wigdom. One memorable Instagram story documented how she sends her wigs out via Uber to be serviced when she can't get to the salon. So she don't want to do her own hair, and she also don't want to do pure wiggery. We love the freedom that comes with morphing from one iteration of ourselves to the next. Their ever-changing hair not only complements their rotating and highly publicized wardrobes and alter egos, but it also creates a fantasy. Celebrity wig stylist Kim Kimble recalls looking to drag queens as some of the early innovators in the wig space. Kimble recalls looking to drag queens as some of the early innovators in the wig space. As the technology and techniques got better, more women began to jump onto the lace front wave. Not just African American, but Caucasian, Latina. They all started wearing wigs. The illusion of real hair propelled the lace front craze. Baby hairs. I'm a sell, man. I seen a lot of men shocked and laughing at that wig video I did. But let me explain something. Don't get it effed up. Just because we wear wigs, most of us got a head full of hair underneath that MFer. Okay? She says, don't get it effed up. Just because we wear wigs, most of us got a head full of hair underneath that. You got a head full of hair under that wig. A head full of hair that I'm assuming you wear the wig so you won't have to do your hair. But then you send the wig out by Uber to have the wig make the salon appointment. And she sound mad too. Business has been so good, in fact, that Kimble has been successfully growing her own hairline, Hairdrobe. At that time, I was working with $10,000 custom-built wigs of all textures that start at $400. I see all these young, talented kids that are 18 years old making these wigs look like they are literally growing out of your scalp. Yeah, I remember when I was a shorty, and the only time I ever saw wigs were when I went on Madison, and they had a wig store, and it was all these wigs in the window or whatever. And also when, as a little boy, 6 or 7 years old, we went to church, and the old lady in church, she wore a wig. The old lady, she used to tell us to shut up all the time. She wore a wig. And every now and again, my grandmother would wear a wig, depending on what was happening, the occasion or whatever. But those are the only times I ever saw wigs being worn. Now, you got 16, 17, 18, all the way to my grandmother's age, wearing wigs every day. In style, Black women's deep relationship with wigs isn't what you think it is. Kayla Greaves, 2020. There was a time when coiler texture's ability to grow toward the skies was seen as a symbol of high status and portrayed closeness to the divine. Black women's relationships with wigs began in ancient Egypt, says hair historian and head of psychology at the University of the District of Columbia, Dr. Afia Bilishaka. There's a lot of research suggesting that wigs were supposed to show rank in society in this culture. A lot of the royal families had these very decorated wigs with gold and lace and other adornments to show that they had nobility. Styles would range from curly to coily, and some would even be braided or in locks. Ancient Egyptian queens wore wigs not only on their head, but also on their chin. Queen Hatshepsut was known to actually wear a beard wig to show her status or to show her masculinity. Wigs for creative expression was a part of performances. With these wigs were a theatrical element. Dr. Crystal Ugochi Agu, the director of the Ethnic Skin Program and assistant professor of dermatology at Johns Hopkins, has found that nearly half of Black women will experience some form of hair loss in their lifetime. The vast majority of wigs Black women purchase do not replicate their natural pattern. And she said traction alopecia being a common cause. You figure that out. Report linker. The global hair wigs and extensions market by revenue is expected to grow at a CAGR of over 13% during the period 2021 through 2026. Native Africans and people of African descent are the largest consumers of hair wigs. Native Africans and people of African descent are the largest consumers of hair wigs and extensions. They spend substantially on chemical hair care products such as relaxers to smoothen and straighten their hair. North America is expected to contribute approximately $2 billion by 2026 to the global hair wigs and extension market. Consumers of African descent constitute one of the largest end user of wigs. Although most consumers are not ready to embrace natural hair, they are increasingly buying hair wigs of human hair as they feel natural. China leads the human hair wigs and extensions market. Counterfeiting remains a major challenge for the growth of the market, as several processing centers in China often mix comb, ground hair, and weft leftovers to make extensions and wigs. Cuticles are chemically stripped off and silicone is applied to offer a natural shine and texture. In 2020, the online sale of hair wigs and extensions accounted for a share of 63% of the global market. Online channels promote their products via social media, which serves as a major impetus for the market growth. In 2020, North America dominated the global hair wigs and extensions market with a share of over 40%. The African and Caucasian descent population in the region is the major contributor to the sale of human and synthetic hair wigs. The African and Caucasian descent population in the region is the major contributor to the sale of human and synthetic hair wigs. Afro-Eurasia, all one continent, all one landmass. The unbelievable truth. Why African Americans spend so much on weave. Larissa Robinson. The weave business has become a $9 billion industry. African Americans spend $507 billion of their estimated buying power of $836 billion on hair care and personal grooming items in 2009. That's a $72 billion difference from what they spent in 2008. Weaves can range from about $200 to $10,000. Most African American women find getting their whole head covered is more convenient because the more hair that's covered, the less maintenance required. Sandra Wumasi, a biology junior at Virginia Commonwealth University, started wearing weaves. It's easier to handle than my own hair. She prefers tracks, strips of her hair sewn into or glued onto one's braided hair. Ashley Evans, an African American Studies senior at VCU, my main motivation for getting a weave was that I was trying to avoid committing any more crimes of damage against my hair. She got a weave to prevent her from committing any more crimes against her own hair. The average person's hair grows half an inch a month, or 6 inches per year. Many African Americans say their hair takes longer to grow. According to hairextensions.com, Pax human hair weaves can cost anywhere between $76 and $400. Women who get new weaves or touch-ups every 2 months can spend about $456 to $2,400 a year just on the hair itself. Brittany Pittman, a member service representative at a local credit union. The main reason she wears it is for added length. My hair is really thin and I like the fuller look. She saves money by reusing the same tracks for the entire 6 months. I get my real hair relaxed once every 2 months. She's committing crimes against her hair. Leon Eldridge, a mechanical engineering senior at VCU. I prefer women without the weave. Weave is just good to look at. After dating an African American woman who became obsessed with weave to the point she couldn't go without it, and even had him pay for it several times, he realized dating a woman with weave is not something he'd like to try again. He also said it was hard being intimate with her because she wouldn't let him touch it. And there were certain activities she wouldn't do with him, like swimming. Many African American women who wear weaves say they don't want people to feel the tracks or to know the hair isn't real, so they don't let people touch it. It's not that they don't let people touch it. They don't let the people who are supposed to be intimate with them touch it, because who goes around touching other people's hair? Others don't do strenuous activities because they fear they'll sweat out or mess up the hair on which they spent so much money. Many African American women who want extravagant, unappealing, or costly styles are influenced by celebrities and the media. Beyonce and Janet Jackson spend thousands of dollars regularly on front lace wigs, tracks, braids, etc. Ikedra King, psychology senior at VCU, said, "Some people get so addicted they start to think and act like the weave actually grows from their heads. Mark Lai, employee of Venus Wholesale Beauty Supply, said, I have all these customers buying hair constantly. It's like an addiction. At his family run store, Yaki Hair, a form of human hair weave, can range between $49 and $60 depending on length. Silky hair, another type of human hair, can range from $80 to $100, he said. He sells 20 to 30 packs of hair a day, meaning the store makes anywhere from $980 to $1,800 or $1,600 to $3,000 a day just from those two types of hair. The women are still unhappy with themselves. They're not satisfied, Lai said. They need more and more. Let's shake it. Britannica Online Encyclopedia. Wig. Manufactured head covering of real or artificial hair worn in the theater as personal adornment, disguise, or symbol of office or for religious reasons. History of wigs. elegantwigs.com. In ancient Egypt, both males and females wore wigs, made either from human hair, sheep's wool, or vegetable fibers, depending upon their social status. There were a number of benefits for Egyptians from shaving their heads. First, it was more comfortable in the hot Egyptian climate not to have hair. Secondly, a bald head helped avoid the danger of an infestation of lice, which was a problem at that time. Wigs became part of a daily wear for the Egyptian people, indicating a person's status as well as their role in a society or politics. The more elaborate and involved the wig was, the higher the social rank. For the Romans in particular, wigs were often made with hair from slaves. Favored hair for Roman wigs was from German tribal slaves with their blonde hair and from slaves from India with their black hair. In France, Louis XIII went prematurely bald. To disguise his baldness, he began wearing elaborate wigs. Kings at royal courts across Europe wore wigs, now a most essential feature of the European noble costume. Some imaginative ladies had wigs with small bird cages, complete with bird on top of their heads. The word wigs itself is taken from periwigs, which was the name of the particularly long, curly wigs that became popular after Charles II was returned to the throne in 1660. Some historians attribute popular fashion status of the periwig to Louis XIII. 1600s periwig made from horsehair. The periwig evolved to this extravagant look. Like a sheep head. Periwigs for the upper classes were made of human hair. The periwig was primarily used for adornment or to cover the loss of real hair. In the American colonies, the gentlemen of fashion followed closely the latest styles in wigs in London and Paris. The 1870s were all about big hair, big curls, big braids, and big chignons, usually made from other hair. Nearly every style involved different hair extensions, ranging from tiny curled frisettes, fuzzy short bangs, to huge braids or long switches. Women today celebrate the wig. ICSID.org, Advanced Business Portal. 2021 by Martha, Business. How much money does the average woman spend on makeup? ICSID.org. A woman in the United States spends an average of $115 per month on makeup and cosmetics. Poshly and Stowaway Cosmetics commissioned a survey of 4,000 women who, on average, owned 40 makeup products each. The global beauty cosmetic market is estimated to generate $382 billion in sales annually. Allure. How much the average woman spends on makeup in her life. Elizabeth Denton, 2017. A recent survey done by beauty e-tailer Skin Store showed that women in the United States spend about $300,000 just on their face during their lifetime. The survey says women are walking around with about $8 worth of products on their face per day. Women who live on the East Coast have what the survey calls expensive faces, clocking in at $11. That differs from women on the West Coast who are walking around with $5 worth of products on their face. Let's shake it. One of the most surprising things we learned is that women use 16 products before they leave the house. The history of false eyelashes. 2022. falseeyelashes.co.uk. A German inventor called Karl Nessler laid claim to the first fake lash patent. The 1940s women, homemade false eyelashes became their go-to product to make them feel glamorous. Marilyn Monroe was one of the most popular lash style icons of the 1950s. Her signature beauty featured long, voluminous lashes that accentuated blue eyes. The false eyelash continued into the 1960s. They became even more popular with the release of the 1966 film Blow Up, in which actress Vanessa Redgrave wore false eyelashes and looked magnificently sexy. The film was a significant moment as it was one of the first mainstream films to feature false eyelashes so prominently. Style icons such as Twiggy sealed the fate of the fake lash industry. Fashion historians credit Twiggy and her style with making false eyelashes mainstream. The 90s, some lash wearers toning down their look and opting for a more natural style. The natural look was in keeping with the overall trend for minimalism that emerged during this decade. Holdouts still preferred a more dramatic look. Naomi Campbell wore false eyelashes on the runway and in her beauty campaigns. One of the most significant moments for false eyelashes was in 1990 when Madonna wore them in her music video, Vogue. One of the most significant moments for false eyelashes was in 2008 when Lady Gaga wore them in her music video, Poker Face. Not to mention the false lash wearing Harry Styles, who has taken androgyny and run with it. The history of fake eyelashes will make you never want to wear them again. Rachel Lubitz, 2017. BusinessInsider.com. Hidden under coats of mascara and camouflaged in an effort to make it look natural, there it will be. A pair or maybe two of fake eyelashes. An entirely mainstream beauty ritual. Why would anyone glue a string of fake eyelashes onto their real ones? Fake eyelashes have a long and rather tortured history that goes all the way back to ancient Rome. In 1899, there were accounts of women having lashes implanted into their eyelids via needles, according to Racht. The more faint of heart attempted to glue human hair to their eyelids instead of threading it, but the method wasn't too successful and the hair often fell off. So he ordered the film's wig maker to glue lashes made of human hair onto Owen's own eyelids using spirit gum. Lillian Gish, writing in her memoir, one morning she arrived at the studio with her eyes swollen nearly shut. Jennifer Lopez wore fake eyelashes made of red fox fur to the 2001 Academy Awards. In 2004, Madonna started wearing a $10,000 pair of mink and diamond lashes to promote her reinvention tour. Fake eyelashes are now sold anywhere from Walmart to Nordstrom. They're currently embraced by nearly every celebrity on a red carpet and drag queens. Cohen Kramer, news and updates. Cohen Kramer, pi.co.uk. Artificial nails, a brief history and what to do when they go wrong. The history of artificial nails. Artificial nails have been worn predominantly by women for hundreds of years. Originally by Egyptian women as a symbol of status and wealth. These were often made from bones or ivory. The concept of the acrylic nail was then accidentally founded in 1954 by a dentist called Frederick Slack. One day at work, he broke his nail and fashioned an artificial nail to go over his broken one using dental acrylic. Put simply, the client's nails are prepared for the application of the acrylic nail by pushing back and cutting the cuticles and filling the pre-existing nail. Acrylic powder and liquid are mixed together to create a tacky substance that is then applied to the pre-existing nail or a nail tip to create length. This is then sculpted into the preferred shape and length and set either by a top coat nail varnish or under a UV lamp. A lack of required skill by the nail technician or poor hygiene practices in preparing and applying the nail extensions can often result in irritations, infections, and even long-term injury. PubMed, artificial nails, very real risk. Joan Portos. While artificial nails have become very popular, they pose a significant risk to patients. Surgical personnel who scrub while wearing artificial nails are putting their patients at higher risk for post-surgical wound infection. Artificial nails harbor microbes and cannot be cleaned as effectively as short, natural nails. PubMed.ncbi.nim.nih.gov. The health dangers of artificial nails. Suki Kramer, 2012, sheknows.com. Acrylic nails, easy to maintain and a way to strengthen and lengthen those short, ugly, natural nails, but the side effects can be scary. Women are not only willing to shell out big money for gel and acrylic nails, they're also sometimes willing to compromise their health. The chemicals used to apply acrylic nails are notoriously unhealthy and include such offenders as resins and formaldehyde, which have been shown to cause cancer. Exposure to these chemicals through your nails over a long period of time can result in complete nail loss by destruction of the nail matrix. If the nail rips from the nail bed, that gap or space provides a rich, moist, warm environment for bacteria and fungi to grow. Rigidly adhered acrylics lead to serious nail breaks, infection, and loss of the natural nail. The healing time resulting in pain and sensitivity can last more than a year. Some hospitals don't allow employees to wear artificial nails due to the risk of infection to patients. Several deaths of premature infants in the late 90s were blamed on an acrylic nail infection transmitted by a nurse. Some nail salons are using a poisonous and illegal substance called MMA in their nail adhesives. Methyl methacrylate. DBP is a plasticizing ingredient that is banned for use in cosmetic products in the European Union, but can be found in everything from polishes to skin creams. A brief history of cosmetic procedures. Premier Vein and Vascular, vascular and endovascular surgery, a brief history of cosmetic procedures. As early as 800 BC, physicians in India were developing early skin graft procedures. In the text De Medicina by Aulus Cornelius Celsus, the Roman physician laid out some of the earliest known surgical methods for reconstructing facial features such as the ears, nose, and lips. During the Byzantine period, another physician named Oribacillus compiled one of the first medical encyclopedias entitled The Synagogue Medicae, which also has chapters dedicated to repairing facial features. During and after the Great War, Europe's top surgeons dedicated their studies to restoring their soldiers to wholeness. Surgeons began to perform a wider variety of procedures, such as the first recorded purely cosmetic procedures, such as rhinoplasty and breast augmentations. Dr. John Peter Matower used surgical instruments of his own design to perform the first cleft palate operation in 1827, a surgical stride made entirely in the United States. Almost a century later, in 1907, Dr. Charles Miller penned the first book specifically written on the subject of cosmetic surgery, The Correction of Featural Imperfections. Perhaps the most important institution regarding America's contribution to plastic surgery history is Johns Hopkins. The Johns Hopkins facility was also the base of Dr. John Stage Davis, who was the first America dedicated to solely practicing plastic surgery. In the 1960s and 70s, plastic surgery began to resemble the practice we know today. In 1969, a plastic surgeon was appointed as Surgeon General, proof that plastic surgeons were moving to the forefront of medical sciences. The development of silicone changed things drastically. Initially used to treat skin imperfections, the first breast implant was created in 1962 by Dr. Thomas Cronin, leading to the development of implants for just about every part of the body over the next several decades. The biggest recent trend is minimally invasive procedures, with the purpose of staving off the signs of aging. Injectable substances such as wrinkle fillers and Botox continue to be used more often, with a reported 1.1 million Botox injections administered in America each year. History of ASPS, American Society of Plastic Surgeons. History of ASPS. Written evidence cites medical treatment for facial injuries more than 4,000 years ago. Physicians in ancient India were utilizing skin grafts for reconstructive work as early as 800 BC. The driving force behind most plastic surgery developments during the late 1800s and early 1900s was war. With the awful injuries it often inflicts on its participants, in fact, it was the war to end all wars, World War I, that catapulted plastic surgery into a new and higher realm. Never before had physicians been required to treat so many and such extensive facial and head injuries. Shattered jaws, blown off noses and lips, and gaping skull wounds caused by modern weapons required innovative restorative procedures. American Society of Plastic Surgeons, Fat Grafting History and Applications, Ricardo Rodriguez, MD, Baltimore, Maryland, 2015. Fat grafting, also referred to as fat transfer or fat injections, is the surgical process by which fat is transferred from one area of the body to another area. The technique involves extracting adipose fat by liposuction, processing the fat, and then re-injecting purified fat into the area needing improvement. Since the 1990s, plastic surgeons have reliably used fat grafting as a way to improve and enhance the cosmetic appearance of the face, breasts, hands, feet, hips, buttocks. The first fat grafting procedure dates back to the late 19th century, 1893, when a German plastic surgeon, Gustav Neuber, transferred fat from the arm to the orbital eye region to correct scars formed by osteomyelitis, bone infection. Only 2 years later, 1895, Dr. Victor Czerny transferred a lipoma to the breast to establish symmetry following a unilateral partial mastectomy. Extraction of small volumes of fat can easily be tolerated using a local anesthetic. However, larger volumes, 500 cc's, almost always require that the patient be sedated with IV anesthesia or general anesthesia. A Journey Through Liposuction and Liposculpture Review, PMC. Annals of Medicine and Surgery. Elisa Bellini, Michelle P. Greco, Eduardo Reposio. Liposuction is the most frequently performed aesthetic surgery procedure in Western countries. Liposuction is mainly used to correct deep and superficial fat accumulations and remodel the body contour. The first attempt to remodel the body silhouette dates back to 1921, when Dr. Charles Dejarrier wanted to improve the shape of the ankles and knees to a dancer patient. He removed a large part of skin and soft tissue with a broad subcutaneous dissection and long skin incision. The result was tragic because of an excessive removal of tissue and suture too tight and live. This caused necrosis and amputation. Several complications such as hematoma, long-term seroma, necrosis, infections, and many post-operative body deformities burdened this technique. Let's shake it. He introduced blunt cannulas of smaller diameter to reduce the section of nerves, lymphatic vessels, and blood vessels. To make the technique less traumatic and reduce hemorrhage risk, he gradually developed the wet technique, based on the injection of saline solution and hyaluronidas into the fat, performing a hydrodissection before the liposuction procedure. In 1987, Jeffrey Klein, a Californian dermatologist, first reported on the use of large volumes of very dilute anesthesia, which allowed liposuction to be performed in larger volumes completely under local anesthesia, without the need of sedation or general anesthesia. Klein invented a recipe consisting of 0.05% lidocaine, epinephrine, and 10 milliliters sodium bicarbonate per liter of saline, which could be infused into tissue prior to liposuction. The current options for anesthesia are dry, wet, super wet, and tumescent. The essential differences between these techniques focus on the amount of infiltrating solution injected into the tissue and the resultant blood loss as a percentage of aspirated fluid. The dry technique involves no infused fluid and results in approximately 25 to 40% blood loss of the volume removed. True complications that are possible include contour defects, permanent skin color changes, infection, emboli, hematomas, or seromas. Edema is very common and generally persists for several weeks, and some venous areas such as ankles and calves may persist for 6 months or a year. Hyperesthesia and dysesthesia are common sequelae of the procedure. Overly aggressive liposuction can lead to seromas. The most common postoperative complication is contour irregularities, with an incidence of 2.7%. Grazer and De Jong reported a fatality rate of 19.1 per 100,000 liposuction procedures. The most frequent potentially lethal complications associated with liposuction are pulmonary embolism, fat embolism, sepsis, necrotizing fasciitis, and perforation of abdominal organs. The most frequent cause of death was deep venous thrombosis associated with pulmonary embolism. Abdominal and bowel perforations are reported as the second commonest lethal event, 14.6%. In 10% of cases, the death was caused by the use of local anesthesia, sedation, and other medications. Bleeding represents 4.6% of lethal events. Major risk factors for the development of severe complications are multiple procedures, poor standards of sterility, excessive infiltration and intoxication from lidocaine or adrenaline, excessive removal of adipose tissue with volume depletion in the third space, permissive postoperative discharge, and selection of unfit patients. General anesthesia, side effects, risk, and stages. What to know about general anesthesia. Medically reviewed by Deborah Sullivan, PhD, MSN, RN, CNE.co by Tim Newman, 2021. General anesthetics have been in surgery since 1842 when Crawford Long administered diethyl ether to a patient and performed the first painless operation. This is from medicalnewstoday.com. Side effects of general anesthesia can include temporary confusion and memory loss, dizziness, difficulty passing urine, bruising or soreness from the IV drip, nausea, and vomiting. Other risk: postoperative confusion, heart attack, pneumonia, stroke. Some specific conditions increase the risk to the patient undergoing general anesthetic, such as obstructive sleep apnea, seizures, existing heart, kidney, or lung conditions, high blood pressure, alcohol use disorder, smoking, history of reactions to anesthesia, medications that can increase bleeding, aspirin, for example, drug allergies, diabetes, obesity, or overweight. Death as a result of general anesthetic, roughly 1 in every 100,000. The chemical makeup of general anesthetic drugs ranges from the simplicity of alcohol's chemical makeup to the complexity of sevoflurane. General anesthetics are known to act at a number of sites within the central nervous system. The importance of these sites on the induction of anesthesia is not fully understood. These sites include cerebral cortex, thalamus, reticular activating system, spinal cord. Ten of the most common plastic surgery complications. In 2017, Americans spent more than $6.5 billion on cosmetic surgery, from breast augmentation to eyelid surgery. Healthline.com. Hematoma occurs in 1% of breast augmentation procedures. It's almost the most common complication after a facelift. Seroma, serum or sterile body fluid, pools beneath the surface of the skin, resulting in swelling and sometimes pain. It's the most common complication following a tummy tuck in 15 to 30% of patients. Infection remains one of the most common complications of plastic surgery. Infections occur in 1.1 to 2.5% of people who undergo breast augmentation. Nerve damage is present in many different types of surgical procedures. Numbness and tingling are common after plastic surgery and can be signs of nerve damage. In some cases, it can be permanent. Most women experience a change in sensitivity after breast augmentation surgery, and 15% experience permanent changes in nipple sensation. The risk of clots is 5 times higher for people having multiple procedures than it is for people having only one procedure. Liposuction can be traumatic for the internal organs. Visceral perforations or punctures can occur when the surgical probe comes into contact with internal organs. The perforations may also be fatal. Hypertrophic scarring is an abnormally red and thick raised scar. It occurs in 1.0 to 3.7% of tummy tucks. Anesthesia is the use of medication to make you unconscious. It allows patients to undergo surgery without feeling the procedure. Anesthesia can sometimes lead to lung infections, stroke, heart attacks, and death. More common anesthesia risks include shivering, nausea, and vomiting, waking up confused and disoriented, fatal outcomes from liposuction. Census Survey of Cosmetic Surgeons, 2000. Frederick M. Grazer, Rudolph H. de Jong. ResearchGate.net. In this census survey, the mortality rate computed to 1 in 5,224, or 19.1 per 100,000. Serious complications and fatalities have occurred in association with this procedure. Grazer and de Jong showed that among all physicians performing liposuction, most deaths, 47.7%, occurred when the procedure is performed in a physician's office. The highest death rate was 100 in 100,000, or 1 in 1,000, and was based on a study from a malpractice company insuring plastic surgeons in California. In a survey of plastic surgeons, it was found that the main cause of death after liposuction was pulmonary thromboembolism, constituting 23% of all deaths. 31 in a prospective series of office-based surgical procedures. 63.5% of post-operative deaths were secondary to thromboembolism. The recent census survey by Grazer and de Jong revealed 130 deaths following liposuction between 1994 and 1998. In that and other studies, lidocaine toxicity was implicated as a potential factor in perioperative liposuction deaths, along with poor patient selection, excessive fluid resuscitation, pulmonary embolism, and inadequate fluid resuscitation. Injuries may involve the liver, gallbladder, spleen, and small and large bowel. As evident from our review, these patients present in a critical state with active sepsis and shock and require emergency surgery. Several studies have attributed the mortality of liposuction procedures to cardiac dysrhythmias, myocardial infarction, fluid overload, pulmonary edema, and fatal asystole. However, no clear etiology has been determined. Abdominal perforation was reported as the second highest cause of death after thromboembolism. Liposuction still imparts potential morbidity and mortality. Major potentially life-threatening complications of liposuction include necrotizing fasciitis, TSS, pulmonary embolism, toxicity of drug interactions, and visceral organ perforation, TSS, and necrosis fasciitis commonly are severe infections. National Center for Health Research. The real threat to women's health. Diana Zuckerman, PhD, National Center for Health Research. Approximately 1 in 1 million women who undergo abortions during the first 8 weeks of pregnancy die from the procedure. 1 in 50,000 women are dying from other more popular elective procedures in clinics and doctors' offices. Cosmetic surgery. These cosmetic surgery patients are at 20 times the risk of death. Every year, clinics perform cosmetic surgery on approximately 1.4 million women and 200,000 men and perform an additional 13 million minimally invasive cosmetic procedures, such as facial injections to make wrinkles disappear and chemical peels. Cosmetic surgeons estimate that the invasive procedures and anesthesia involved in their procedures result in a death rate of 1 in 50,000 outpatient procedures. This translates to approximately 100 cosmetic surgery-related deaths per year. Approximately 12 women dying from complications of an abortion in a typical year, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Women who have abortions later in their pregnancies have a death rate higher than 1 in 1 million, approximately 1 per 29,000 during weeks 16 to 20 of pregnancy. Both are safer than liposuction, which is a fatal procedure for 1 in 5,000 women each year. The Wild West of plastic surgery, explaining that since plastic surgery is a lucrative business, an increasing number of doctors are closing their traditional medical practices and opening cosmetic surgery centers. These physicians learn the basics of plastic surgery through weekend courses, shadowing other doctors, and even online webinars. The credentialing requirements may not be as strict. This influx of poorly trained cosmetic surgeons has resulted in terrible cosmetic outcomes, such as women with breast implants in their armpits and one woman with shark bite-sized divots all over her thighs and stomach after undergoing laser liposuction. Aesthetic Surgery Journal, Oxford Academic. Brazilian butt lift, associated mortality, the South Florida experience, 2022. By 2017, the risk of death from pulmonary fat was identified, earning the BBL the highest mortality rate of any aesthetic surgical procedure. South Florida carries the highest BBL mortality by far in the nation. South Florida has experienced 25 BBL-related fat emboli deaths between 2010 and 2022. However, the short surgical times for these cases may be the most important contributors to the BBL mortality in South Florida. Plastic surgeons worldwide have been performing this surgery for almost 40 years. By the turn of the century, the procedure had come to be known as the Brazilian butt lift, BBL. Social media has also played a major role in popularizing these silhouettes. As fat transfer volumes increased to a level that surgeons once thought would overwhelm the subcutaneous recipient site, surgeons began grafting deeper into the vascularized gluteal musculature. Detailed MRI venography studies of the gluteal venous system and subsequent post-mortem exams suggest that there really is no safe zone for fat grafting in the intramuscular or submuscular plane. BBL surgery was one of the fastest growing procedures in aesthetic surgery. Unfortunately, with the increase in cases come came an unprecedented surge in the mortality associated with this procedure. In 2015, plastic surgeons in Mexico and Colombia, over the past 10 and 15 years respectively, and identified 13 pulmonary fat emboli deaths in Mexico and 9 deaths in Colombia after gluteal fat grafting. All the deaths were associated with intramuscular fat grafting. In July 2016, the Aesthetic Surgery Education and Research Foundation sent the Gluteal Fat Grafting Survey to all active members of the Aesthetic Society and the International Society for Aesthetic Plastic Surgery. A total of 692 surgeons responded on 198,857 cases. From the answers estimated the mortality to be between 1 in 2,351 and 1 in 6,241, earning BBL notoriety as the deadliest procedure in plastic surgery. In 2017, 5 deaths following BBL had occurred in South Florida alone. BBL surgery is a blind procedure performed by tactile feel. Our community has seen even more BBL deaths from other causes such as sepsis, anemia, bowel and organ perforation, ischemic strokes, thromboembolic, pulmonary emboli, and cardiac events. Some have suggested that the large number of daily cases undertaken by surgeons at the high volume budget clinics may be a significant risk factor in the high mortality associated with BBL surgery in South Florida. The short operative times for many of these cases is truly alarming because they are indicative of a surgical technique at a speed that is at best imprecise and at worst unsafe. How America became a nation of yoga pants. Bloomberg. How America became a nation of yoga pants. It took a few decades, but a shift toward casual wear and fitness, as well as a company called Lululemon, is changing what everyone wears. Kim Basin and Gerald Porter Jr., 2018. The first pairs of yoga pants by Lululemon sold in 1998 were a simple item for women to wear at the studio. They've conquered the closet, even for people who never see the inside of a yoga studio. Teenagers began to prefer leggings over jeans. People started wearing athletic clothing, mostly just yoga pants to run errands. Now they're wearing yoga pants to the office. U.S. imports of women's elastic knit pants last year surpassed those of jeans for the first time ever, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Fashion trends seesaw constantly, but rarely does an entire category shift. Yoga pants have similarly managed to plunge denim into an existential crisis, threatening Levi Strauss & Company so deeply that it had to scramble to adapt. $48 billion is being spent on activewear in the U.S. every year. In the basement of its Vancouver headquarters is a lab called Whitespace, the retailer's research and development skunk works. Here a team of about 50 employees works to come up with the brand's next big idea. It's developed lightweight seamless bras and made yoga pants with repurposed yarn combinations normally used in lingerie. The staff isn't made up of just textile workers tasked with making new fabrics. It includes scientists as well as physiologists, mechanical engineers, neuroscientists, and biomechanists. Active bottoms and leggings are now a $1 billion industry, according to MPD Group analyst Marshall Cohen. There are more than 11,000 kinds of yoga-specific pants available at the retailers worldwide, according to data from retail research firm Edited, across both men's and women's apparel. Tight clothes, fashion friendly, but not always health friendly. Medically reviewed by Jenna Risch, RN, 2021. Healthline.com. Too tight is pretty subjective. What feels tight to someone else may feel completely fine to you. A few key signs of too tight clothing might include red marks on your skin, pressure marks, skin irritation, numbness or tingling, difficulty breathing, restricted movement. Some common culprits include tight pants or jeans, including workout leggings or skinny jeans, belts, bras, both regular and sports style, shapewear, tights and pantyhose, corset style tops. Common issues that crop up when wearing over-tight clothing include irritation and pain. You might also notice marks where clothing constricts and squeezes your skin. Registered dietitian Michelle Rauch points out that tight clothing can worsen gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, and gastroesophageal reflux disease. Tight-fitting clothing have the capacity, when too tight, to put additional stress on the stomach and intestines, Rauch says. This can worsen symptoms like acid reflux and heartburn. Over the long term, she adds, repeated acid reflux can lead to more serious conditions like esophagitis, which can make swallowing painful and difficult. Wearing tight pants, pantyhose, and shapewear can also lead to yeast infections in people with vulvas. Tight clothing often has little breathability. For one, the risk for infection increases if you sweat in your clothing or don't change moist workout gear or swimwear promptly. A 2013 review suggests tight clothing can cause a type of spinal nerve compression called myalgia paresthetica. This condition can cause numbness, tingling, and pain in the side of your thigh. According to a 2020 study from the University of Toronto, tight, revealing workout gear may hamper athletic performance in women. The researchers ultimately concluded that while there's nothing wrong with tight workout gear, it might not boost your performance like brands say it will. If you repeatedly wear clothing that restricts blood flow and digestion or compresses your nerves, you may end up facing more lasting effects. The real history behind sagging pants, menswear style. The real history behind sagging pants, originating from prison uniforms and popularized by hip-hop and skate culture. By Patty Madison, Fashion History, 2017. Let's shake it. Trends are by their very nature ridiculous. Wearing one's jeans around one's arse with boxer shorts on full display. This is called sagging, a male fashion trend that has dipped in and out of popularity since the early 1990s. One of the most widely repeated stories proposing that in the American prison system, sagging pants were a sign of sexual availability. Another rumor is that gang members in the States took to wearing their jeans in this way as it made it easier for them to conceal weapons. Both of these theories are untrue. The real origins of the sagging fad did not come from the American prison system. The real origins of the sagging fad did come from the American prison system, but not as a signal that the wearer was up for a bit of action. In actual fact, prisoners were often given uniforms that were several sizes too big for them, and due to suicide prevention efforts behind bars, were not allowed belts. This combination of factors led to inmates' trousers riding at half-mast much of the time. As prisoners were released, they continued to wear their trousers sagged, and it wasn't long before it creeped into the hip-hop dress code. Young men all over the world were soon brandishing their buttocks above their jeans. Styled. Sagging pants have a dark history rooted in American slavery and violation. A dehumanizing practice called breaking the buck is where this popular style of dress came from. Dodge the hijack. By Cheryl E. Preston. Young men in America began wearing sagging pants during the 1990s. Unlike other fads that come and go, this one style has stuck around for 30 years. Unruly black men would be taken to a public place where all the other slaves were watching and told to lower their pants and bend forward. At that point, the master would brutally violate the man. After this act of violation, the slave would be forced to wear these pants with no belt and allow them to sag as evidence he had been busted or broken in. Sagging pants also have a history in the American prison system. Prisoners cannot wear belts because they can be used as weapons. This is why those who are incarcerated wear pants that sag. For more than 3 decades, this trend has remained. This style of dress originated within the African American community, with hip-hop artists and rappers leading the way. Many young men were walking around holding their sagging pants by the waist as they tried to walk or run. The mode of dressing now transcends racial boundaries. This mode of dressing now transcends racial boundaries. This fashion statement originated out of the need to control others. Slate, tourniquet trousers, and straining armholes. Can men's clothing possibly get any tighter? Simon Doonan, 2015. We are here to talk about the current epidemic of hyper-fitted, nut-mangling menswear. Mainstream men's clothing has become body-hugging to the point of obscenity. Tights, the first skinny jeans. Today's seam busters are wearing ferociously fitted suits. GQ, a brief history of men in tights, from Henry VIII to Paul George. Men's leggings. The New York Times reports that they're becoming more commonplace in gyms and on the street, particularly with the shorts over leggings styling. Like all things in fashion, this is just a resurgence. John Januzzi, 2014. Louis XVI, Louis XVI, King of France, 1781, in France, showing your legs was a sign of manly pride and success. And the best way to show those gams? A nice pair of leggings and a little bit of heel. Henry VIII, King of England, 1536. Winston Churchill, in his youth. Young Churchill is wearing pants cut slim, slim beyond a skinny pant. Early 1900s sporting gear. Riding pants have always been tight and close to the leg. Robin Hood, Men in Tights, 1993, perhaps the most famous man in tights. Givenchy, Fall 2010. This is when we see leggings starting to seep in through the fashion scene. Paul George, Indiana Pacers. The NBA won't allow full-length leggings, but if there's anybody you can credit with the rise of athletic tights, it's these guys. Top 10 media companies in the United States by Hassan, 2009. The mass media forms the image of the world for us and tells us what to think about that image. The manipulating techniques of media come across in the way some items are played down while others are emphasized by their choice of words, tone of voice, facial expressions, headlines, and choice of illustrations. All these things subliminally and subtly affect the way we interpret what we see or hear. Time Warner is the largest media conglomerate and was founded by Jewish Warner Brothers. It was formerly three companies: Warner Communications, Inc., Time, Inc., and America Online, Inc. The company was bought by America Online for $160 billion in the year 2000. News Corporation. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation owns Fox Television Network, Fox News, the FX channel, 20th Century Fox Films, Fox 2000, and publisher HarperCollins. Walt Disney Company. The Walt Disney Company, founded on October 16, 1923 by the Disney brothers, Walt and Roy Disney. Comcast Corp. Comcast Corporation. The nation's largest cable provider for broadband cable networks is founded by Ralph J. Roberts, Julian A. Brodsky, and Daniel Aaron in 1963. It owns E! Entertainment Television, 10 Comcast Sports Net networks, E! Newsletter Daily, Candy, and the Golf Channel. And CEO Brian Roberts says they are planning on growing the content business. Google, topping the list for brand value at $100 billion. Founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin in 1998 when they were both students at Stanford University. Google and Fox Interactive Media of News Corp entered into an agreement. DirecTV Group, Dish Network Corporation. This company was founded by Charlie Ergen. CBS Corporation. It operates the CBS television network and about 40 broadcast television stations and 15 of the top 20 U.S. markets, including 21 stations owned and operated by CBS. The CEO is Leslie Moonves. and chairman Summer Redstone is the owner of National Amusement and a majority shareholder. CBS was formed in 2005 when the old Viacom split into two different companies, New Viacom and CBS Corp. In 1985, Ted Turner made a bid to buy CBS. Turner was a Gentile, a term used to refer to non-Jews. He was regarded by the Jews at CBS as someone who might turn against them in the future. To spoil Turner's bid, executives at CBS invited Lawrence Tisch, a Jewish billionaire, for a friendly takeover of CBS. For almost 10 years from 1986, Tisch was the chairman and CEO of CBS until finally 20% of CBS stock was owned by Time Warner. Omnicom. Under the leadership of CEO John Wren, Omnicom has become the #1 holding company in the world today. Viacom, headed by Summer Redstone, a Jew, is one of the top 10 media companies. Viacom produces and distributes TV programs for three largest networks, owns 39 television stations, owns 185 radio stations in the Infinity Radio Group, as well as having more than 1,500 affiliated stations through the CBS radio network. Viacom also produces feature films through Paramount Pictures. This company was formed in 1971, and its chief claim to fame is as the world's largest provider of cable programming through its MTV, Showtime, Black Entertainment Television or BET, Nickelodeon, and other networks. There is no greater power in this world today than mass media of news and entertainment, which is the power that shapes every citizen, irrespective of caste or creed, rich or poor. Facts on media in America. Did you know? Comcast owns NBC, Disney owns ABC, News Corp owns Fox Broadcasting Company. Comcast owns NBC, Telemundo, E! Entertainment, Versus, 14 television stations, Universal Pictures, and Hulu. Disney holdings include 10 television stations, 277 radio stations, ABC, ESPN, A&E, the History Channel, Lifetime, Discover Magazine, Bassmaster Magazine, Hyperion Publishing, Touchstone Pictures, Pixar Animation, and Miramax Film Corp. Viacom owns 10 television stations, the Movie Channel, Comedy Central, BET, Nickelodeon, TV Land, MTV, VH1, and Paramount Pictures. CBS owns 30 TV stations, Smithsonian Channel, Showtime, the Movie Channel, and Paramount Network Television. News Corp owns 27 television stations, the Fox Network and Fox News Channel, FX, National Geographic Channel, The Wall Street Journal, TV Guide, The New York Post, DirecTV, the publisher HarperCollins, film production company 20th Century Fox, and the social networking website MySpace. Time Warner owns HBO, CNN, the Cartoon Network, Warner Brothers, Time Magazine, Turner Broadcasting, and DC Comics. 6 major companies control most of the media in our country. Since 1995, the number of companies owning commercial TV stations declined by more than 40%. 3 media giants own all of the cable news networks. Comcast and Time Warner serve about 35% of cable households. Clear Channel Inc. owns 850 radio stations across the country. News Corp, Comcast, NBC Universal, Time Warner, the New York Times, Disney, and Gannett dominates the top internet news sites. The entertainment industry. television, motion picture companies, music has put $283.5 million into federal elections since 1990. In just the past 3 years, 2008 to 2010, the industry has spent roughly that much again on lobbying. With their political clout, media giants have the ability to make their case heard at the FCC, the White House, and Capitol Hill. The concerns of average citizens do not get the same attention from key policymakers. www.commoncause.org. John P. Murray, Children and Television Violence. The official starting date for television in the United States was 1939 at a World's Fair. In virtually every country in the world except for the United States began first as a public system. Television in the United States began as a commercial enterprise to sell goods and services while providing entertainment. In 1949, only 2% of American households had TV. By 1955, 64% of American households had at least one television set. By the mid-1960s, 93% of American households had a television set. Today, there are very few people, only 2%, who do not have television. Let's go back up to this section, which says, the first license was issued by the Federal Communications Commission on July 1st, 1941, although development was held in abeyance by World War II. Let's go off on a tangent. They mentioned World War II, they mentioned television, its effects, and let's see who the people are during World War II. Let's see the people that television is going to have an effect on. Let's just see who the people are during the World War II era. Just on a side note, Britannica Online Encyclopedia. World War II. Also called Second World War, conflict that involved virtually every part of the world during the years 1939 through 1945. The principal belligerents were the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allies, France, Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and, to a lesser extent, China. JSTOR. Who is an Indian? Who is a Negro? Virginia Indians in the World War II draft. Paul T. Murray, The Virginia Magazine of History and Biography. JSTOR.org. Who is an Indian? Who is a Negro? Virginia Indians in the World War II draft by Paul T. Murray. A racial label is usually assigned by reference to obvious physical criteria, such as skin color, hair texture, and facial characteristics. In a society where one's social position depends heavily upon race, resolving questions of racial classification become a serious issue. During the Second World War, a group of Virginia Indians challenged the prevailing system of racial classification. When called to register with the Selective Service System, they listed their race as Indian. During the Second World War, a group of Virginia Indians, when called to register with the Selective Service System, they listed their race as Indian. Local draft boards, however, would not accept this claim. The boards insisted that the proper classification for all alleged Indians was Negro. The Indians were adamant in refusing this designation. Draft board members were equally determined not to classify the men as Indians because such a classification would mean that they would be sent to military service together with whites. University of Lynchburg. White and everything else. Promotion, the 1924 Virginia Racial Integrity Act. J. Casey Gilliam, University of Lynchburg. Around the time TV got its first license, television got its first license, it was in abeyance for World War II. So we're off on a tangent about World War II. The people, just the people on this landmass in terms of during World War II. Senior Honors Project, Westover Honors Program. Remember, a group of Indians went and when they registered with the Selective Service for World War II, they were Indians, so that's what they wrote down for their race. But any designation for Indian, they said, was Negro. Members of the movement used its principles to improve the American race through selective breeding. The leaders of the movement adopted the name eugenics. The Commonwealth of Virginia pursued both aspects of eugenics. Under the leadership of Dr. Walter Ashby Plecker, Virginia took a radical stance against racial amalgamation through legislation defining race. Dr. Walter Ashby Plecker, director of the Virginia Bureau of Vital Statistics, from its creation in 1912 to the time of his resignation in 1946. In 1924, at the peak of fears about race mixing, Virginia furthered the separation of races by passing Senate Bill 219, an act to improve racial integrity. The Racial Integrity Act defined a white person as a person who has no trace whatsoever of any blood other than Caucasian, but persons who have 1/16 or less of the blood of the American Indian and have no other Caucasic blood shall be deemed white. The clause included those persons with 1/16 or less American Indian blood was added to appease those first families of Virginia who claimed to be descended from Pocahontas and has since been dubbed the Pocahontas Clause. And in the Westover manuscripts by William Byrd, it was said Powhatan, Pocahontas' father, was followed by 200 men as black as him. The clause included those persons with 1/16 or less American Indian blood was added to appease those first families of Virginia who claimed to be descended from Pocahontas. One-drop arguments such as the Racial Integrity Act appeared in courts as early as the 1830s, but were rejected because it would call prominent heritages into question. Enforcement of the new act was the responsibility of the local authorities. The state expected midwives, school officials, physicians, health officers, local registrars, and clerks of the courts to abide by this new law by documenting and providing correct racial identification of all persons. Plecker wrote those placed in charge just a few days after the law was passed in the Virginia Senate. Mrs. Mary Gilden, a midwife of Lynchburg, Virginia, received a letter from Plecker after a child that she helped deliver was registered as white. It then was determined to be colored by the local health department. A light-skinned shorty. A light-skinned shorty then was determined to be colored. Mrs. Gilden, this is to notify you that it is a penitentiary offense to willfully state that a child is white when it is colored. Failure to abide by the new law meant a possibility of up to 1 year in a state penitentiary. The records were labeled as colored when filed under the new system. The interpretation of the word colored by Plecker. Previously in the state of Virginia, the term covered both those free issues along with Virginia's Indian population, but Plecker reinterpreted the word to imply black. In years prior to the Racial Integrity Act, the term colored included both Negroes and Virginia Indians. Let me say that again. In years prior to the Racial Integrity Act, the term colored included both dark-skinned and light-skinned Americans. State officials easily enter into a community, determine the racial status of one or more individuals, and thus establish the racial status of all those living in the area. The Census Bureau's registration of persons as free issues or colored, but when registered as colored by the census, it could mean Indian. Laughlin wrote to him, "The eugenicists in different parts of the country are increasingly interested in this racial integrity idea and would welcome any facts which we could publish concerning the growth of the Virginia idea and the exact definition still maintained by the several states." In 1930, Plecker and Laughlin achieved a major legislative victory in Virginia with the passing of a second racial integrity law that redefined Native Americans, now Native Americans. No, are we talking about American Indians or Native Americans? In Virginia, with the passing of a second racial integrity law that redefined Native Americans as persons with 1/4 or more parts Indian blood and 1/16 or less black blood. It also stipulated that all persons classified as American Indian must live on a segregated reservation. Otherwise, they would be listed as colored. This includes anyone who didn't comply. This included all those people who didn't comply. I mean, I couldn't see, say, for instance, my father, my father's father, his father. I can't see them complying and living on some reservation. Although we could argue that that the projects in the inner cities are similar to reservations. Yeah. Second racial integrity law that redefined Native Americans as persons with 1/4 or more parts Indian blood and 1/16 or less black blood. It also stipulated that all persons classified as American Indian must live on a segregated reservation. Otherwise, they would be listed as colored. So when they say redefined Native Americans, essentially it seems as though they mean created the Native American. And then the American Indian who complied and went and lived on the reservation essentially became the new creation, the Native American. Plecker and his concerns with near whites' potential to give birth to children with Negroid characteristics. The Virginia Racial Integrity Act of 1924, the definition of a Negro as a person with a drop of black blood or displayed Negroid features and or darker brown complexion as dark copper, called the racial background of even the most distinguished families of Virginia into question. PBS, Race and the Army during World War II. Since the Civil War, African American and white units had been kept separate. By the end of the war, more than 695,000 African Americans were serving in the U.S. military. We're going from American Indian to black to African American. You know this by 695 African Americans were serving in the U.S. military. There is no talk of a large number of American Indians serving because the name has been changed. We're talking around that time. This is my great-grandfather. His name is Wesley. This is the 1930 census. He's 49. Birthplace, Alabama. Race, he's labeled a Negro. We already know talked about the Negro and all of that stuff. The black, the Negro, the colored, American Indian, Americans. Relationship to head of the household, he the head of the household. His father, birthplace, Alabama. Mother's birthplace, Alabama. His wife, Ida, is my great-grandmother. One of them anyway. Another one of my great-grandfathers, Reuben. Another one from Alabama, 44 in 1940. Birthplace, Alabama. Race, they call him Negro. Ethnicity, African American. The progression of labels, or the digression of labels. The digression of labels. Relationship to head of the household. He the head of the household. His wife, Mary. That's my great-grandmother, one of my great-grandmothers. And on the actual census record, they are labeled in terms of occupation as farmers. Someone who tills the land, or a husbandman, the head of the household. All these things meant the same thing. Head of the household, farmer. Anyone who lived in that house who was 16 and above were laborers. Laborer, worker, slaves. It's no different. It's no different today. If you want to know what happened yesterday, look at today. The same thing. What do you think you are when you get up every day at can't see in the morning and you go labor for somebody to can't see at night. What do you think you are? You a laborer, a worker, a slave, a peon. Let's go back to it was important to get I think it was important to get a glimpse of who the Americans were, who the people of this land were during World War II, during the, as we were talking about television and the effect on people as a mass controlling mechanism. Let's get back into media culture. The National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence was a presidential commission established by President Johnson in response to the assassinations of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King to assess the role violence plays in our society. This was a broad-ranging national commission, sometimes referred to as the Eisenhower Commission because it was chaired by Milton Eisenhower. The Eisenhower Commission issued its report in 1969, actually a bookshelf full of reports. There were about 9 or 10 staff report volumes. One of those volumes was devoted to media violence, not just television, but media violence. The sections that related to television violence reviewed the research that was available up to that date. The pace of research began to pick up speed in the 1960s with some early studies, which I will describe in a moment. Yet, there was a research base to review in the 1960s, and the conclusion of the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence was, and I paraphrase, yes, from the research that we have, although it is thin and limited, we do know that there is a reason for concern about violence in media, particularly violence on television, and particularly the violence on television that is seen by children. To the mid-1960s, the Surgeon General responded by placing the TV violence controversy in the same context as the smoking and lung cancer controversy, a public health context. That was the first time that TV violence had ever been framed as a public health issue. In 1972, concluded that violence on television does influence children who view that programming and does increase the likelihood that they will become more aggressive in certain ways. The next report was in 1992 from the American Psychological Association Task Force on Television and Social Behavior, which concluded that 30 years of research confirms the harmful effects of TV violence. These conclusions were reaffirmed by the American Psychological Association Commission on Violence and Youth. There seem to be 3 major avenues: direct effects, desensitization, and the mean world syndrome. The researchers found that the amount of television viewed predicted fearfulness. Heavy television viewers were much more fearful of the world around them, much more likely to overestimate their level of risk, to overestimate the number of persons involved in law enforcement. We have noted that there are about 25 violent acts per hour in Saturday morning programming directed at children. The only format that will hold the attention span of the large, heterogeneous audience is fast action, fast-paced programming, animated programming. And so Saturday morning programming contains fast action, fast-paced cartoons that tend to be violent. Letter of transmittal. Dr. Jesse L. Steinfeld, 1971, Surgeon General, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Washington, D.C. Our Study of Television and Social Behavior. This report is the result of over 2 years of effort by a distinguished committee of behavioral scientists, the impact of televised violence on the viewer. All the available statistics confirm the pervasive role television plays in the United States, if not throughout the world. More people own television sets and more people watch television than make use of any other single mode of mass communication. Census data indicate that 96% of American homes have one or more television sets. The average home set is on more than 6 hours a day. Television viewing is a daily experience. Studies of media content show that violence is and has been a prominent component of all mass media in the United States. Television is no exception, and there can be no doubt that violence figures prominently in television entertainment. The rate of violent episodes remained constant at about 8 per hour. Cartoons were the most violent type of program in these years. Another study concluded that in 1971, Saturday morning programming, which includes both cartoons and material prepared for adults, approximately 3 out of 10 dramatic segments were saturated with violence, and that 71% involved at least one instance of human violence with or without the use of weapons. This committee has been concerned with children and youth, and in particular with the effects of televised violence on their tendencies toward aggressive behavior. We know that children imitate and learn from everything they see: parents, fellow children, schools, the media. It would be extraordinary indeed if they did not imitate and learn from what they see on television. Children are capable of imitating filmed aggression shown on a movie or television screen. Capacity to initiate, however, does not imply performance. The fact that aggressive or violent behavior presented on film or television can be imitated by children is already thoroughly documented. Some 30 published experiments have been widely interpreted as indicating that the viewing of violence on film or television by children or adults increases the likelihood of aggressive behavior. Violence depicted on television can immediately or shortly thereafter induce mimicking or copying by children. Under certain circumstances, television violence can instigate an increase in aggressive acts. Televised violence may lead to increased aggressive behavior in certain subgroups of children. The very young have difficulty comprehending the contextual setting in which violent acts are depicted and do not grasp the meaning of cues or labels concerning the make-believe character of violent episodes in fictional programs. Each person in the television audience is exposed to a broad variety of stimuli. These stimuli constitute a complex continuum ranging from what was conceived of as fantasy or mediated views of reality. Each person in the audience perceives and further interprets the stimuli through his own patterns of ideas, values, and responses. Generally, Infants and young children are less able than older persons to distinguish stimuli, which are products of fantasy, from those which are products of reality. In the television child setting, the task is further complicated because the child is often left largely to his own devices. To him, the difference between film clips of actual combat or a real riot and dramatic portrayals of similar conflicts may not always be clear. While the child is paying exclusive attention to television, and this is by no means occurs universally, and this by no means occurs universally. He is observed to be physically inactive. He has no opportunity to ask questions of those he sees on the screen. He has no need to plan what he will do next or how he will carry out his plan of action. There is no way he can change the pace of the action on the television or divert the inexorable unfolding of events before him. Whether he smiles or frowns, whether he looks puzzled or enlightened, whether he shows amusement or fright, whether he approves or disapproves, the events roll on. This is a situation very different from his usual social experiences. Some evidence points to a relationship between television viewing and reduced activity, i.e., passivity. As both Lyle and Hoffman and Murray document, not only do children begin viewing at a very early age, but they also begin to develop program preferences and habits almost as soon as they commence viewing. By the first grade, a majority of boys and girls are already showing patterns of program selection and preferences for characters. Parents usually exert little influence over their children's viewing. Our data indicates that in an overwhelming majority of families, the children control the use of the television set through the early evening. The National Center for Health Statistics reports that a survey of the parents of approximately 7,000 children between the ages of 6 and 11 years indicates that the sleep disturbances of more than 1 out of 4 children are considered by the parents to be related to television and radio programs. We use the term models for individuals whose behavior children can observe and thus imitate, whether these individuals are personally in the child's presence or are observed by him through the media. The young boy of today may rely not on observing the behavior of his father and his uncles, the repairmen and the delivery men who come to his house, his doctor, and other men in his life, but also on observing television newscasters, comedians, actors, musicians, and cowboys and westerns, and so forth. The very young child today is exposed to more different models of masculine behavior than any child in human history, in part because of the television set in his home. The New York Times. TV cartoon flashes send 700 Japanese into seizures. 1997. Cheryl Dunn. More than 700 people were taken to hospitals after having been affected by flashing lights on an animated television show broadcast Tuesday night. Some children vomited blood and others had seizures or lost consciousness. The cartoon, highly popular among kindergarten and primary school children, mass suffering from photostimulation, Toshio Yamauchi, a professor at Saitama Medical School and chairman of an organization called Electronic Screen Game and Seizures. I felt a little dizzy toward the end of the program, a third grade student told the Japanese newspaper. I'd be sad if I could not watch the program anymore. Victims said they got headaches or felt nauseated. Others felt groggy or car sick. Television networks immediately pulled the show called Pocket Monsters, which features characters created by the video game and toy maker Nintendo Company. About 20 minutes after it started, there was a scene. A vaccine bomb explodes in an attempt to kill a computer virus. A bright red explosion fills the screen. The red and blue lights flash for about 5 seconds. The scene apparently combined almost simultaneously two techniques that are frequently used in cartoons. The first, called paka paka in Japanese, uses different colored lights flashing alternatively to cause a sense of tension. The second, called flash, emits a strong beam of light. Dr. Yamauchi said light emitted at frequencies between 10 hertz and 30 hertz, a unit of frequency meaning cycles per second, can induce seizures, and that the color red is also stimulative. No evidence has emerged that any were epileptic. Some medical experts here have called it optically stimulated epilepsy. Few cases have been reported in people over 20 years of age. If the children were sitting close to the television, they could have been even more sensitive to the emitting light. Hiroshi Yamauchi, president of Nintendo, said his company was not to blame, and Pocket Monster software for Nintendo's portable game has sold about 7.5 million pieces in less than 2 years. Why Pulse? Three stats on how Gen Z is being raised on smartphones. 2022. Gen Z has been raised on smartphones, receiving them at far younger ages than millennials. As a result, they're more likely to be hooked on phones and say they can't live without them. Millennial parents are giving their own kids phones at even younger ages. There is no question that both Gen Z and millennials are tech-savvy generations who have grown up in the digital age and use their phones for almost everything. YPulse's recent tech device usage behavioral data shows that Gen Z is even more hooked on mobile. Gen Z got their first smartphones even earlier in life than millennials. The iPhone was first released in 2007 when the oldest members of Gen Z were just 6. The majority of them don't remember a pre-smartphone world, and they've also had them in hand from incredibly young ages. On average, Gen Z got their first smartphone at age 12, around 7th grade, making smartphones one of their first screens, and Gen Z a truly mobile-focused generation. Gen Z rely on their smartphones to do almost everything, with 79% of 13 to 20-year-olds telling us that they can't live without their smartphones, compared to 70% of 21 to 39-year-olds. Not much difference, but a difference, but not much. They're also more likely than millennials to use their smartphones multiple times a day. A common sense survey found that the average teen now spends more than a third of the day online. Thanks to millennial parents, the next generation will be just as hooked on phones as Gen Z. Millennial parents plan to give their kids their first smartphone at an average age of 12. It's possible that the younger half of Gen Z is getting their own devices at even younger ages. Only 7% of millennial parents tell us that they never plan to give their children their own smartphone. Applause. A look at Gen Z mobile behaviors. 64% of mobile users are always connected and freer. 2019. The majority of Gen Z smartphone users, 64%, say they are constantly connected online, with 57% admitting that they feel insecure without their mobile phone. Gen Z spend an average 4 hours and 15 minutes per day on mobile, with 95% of them owning a smartphone. 78% of them consider their mobile device their most important device to go online, compared to 74% of millennials. This is businessofapps.com. Around 2 in 5 admit to being easily influenced by other people's opinions, 17% higher than the global average. nationalglobalnews.ca. Is Generation Z glued to technology? It's not an addiction. It's an extension of themselves. 2018. globalnews.ca. It's hardly fair to point a finger at the young cohort of 13 to 23 years old known as Gen Z and accuse them of being addicted to their phones. You'd be hard-pressed to find an adult these days who isn't constantly Googling during a conversation or checking the news during dinner. Generation Z, it's estimated that they log about 10 hours a day online. Global News survey found that number to be closer to 6 hours, and a whopping 96% own a smartphone. This is less an addiction than it is a way of life, if you consider that a life. Millennials and boomers are addicted to their phones. Generation X simply hasn't known a time without the device. Millennials and boomers are addicted to their phones. Generation Z simply hasn't known a time without the device. Tech is seamlessly and vitally integrated into their friendship, Bliss says, to the point where we see trends like live hangouts, live streaming one friend to another while doing mundane things like homework. They're not even speaking. Sherry Turkle, a professor of social studies of science and technology at MIT, calls the rule of 3. This rule stipulates that in a group of 4 or more people, as long as 3 are actively engaged in conversation, one can look at their device without being perceived as rude or self-obsessed. Turkle says that while this does eliminate any sense of faux pas in the action, the result is light, superfluous conversation that lacks depth. Turkle referenced the 15-year-old girl who asked her father to stop Googling for extra facts to add to their dinner conversation. "I want to talk to you," she told him. Richardson, who has 2 Gen Z age sons, notes that the concept of retail shopping is virtually foreign to them. "My sons question why anyone would get in a car and drive to a mall." Century of the Self, the rise of the all-consuming self. Edward Bernays invented public relations in the 1920s. Being the first person to take Freud's ideas to manipulate the masses, he showed American corporations how they could make people want things they didn't need by systematically linking mass produced goods to their unconscious desires. Bernays used psychoanalysis to associate the act of smoking with a sort of challenge to male sexual power. Bernays staged the 1929 Easter parade in New York City, showing models holding lit cigarettes, and told the media to refer to the cigarettes in the press as torches of freedom in a protest against male patriarchal society. The Century of the Self is an award-winning British television documentary series by Adam Curtis. It focuses on how the work of Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud and Edward Bernays influenced the ways corporations and governments have analyzed, dealt with, and controlled people. The Century of the Self asks deeper questions about the roots and methods of modern consumerism, representative democracy, commoditization, and its implications. Sigmund Freud's work provided useful tools for understanding the secret desires of the masses. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Edward Bernays, Propaganda, 1928. A true zombie is nothing more than an unconscious being apathetically and lifelessly lumbering across the planet, buying and consuming everything in its path, unsatisfied, unfulfilled, anxious, and unstill. Judith Fromming. The Life of Dolly. Dolly the Sheep. The Life of Dolly. Dolly was part of a series of experiments at the Roslin Institute that were trying to develop a better method for producing genetically modified livestock. These experiments were carried out at the Roslin Institute by a team led by Professor Sir Ian Wilmot. Because of the nature of the research, the team was made up of many different people, including scientists, embryologists, surgeons, vets, and farm staff. Dolly was cloned from a cell taken from the mammary gland of a 6-year-old Finn Dorset sheep and an egg cell taken from Scottish blackface sheep. She was born to her Scottish blackface surrogate mother on July 5th, 1996. Dolly's white face was one of the first signs that she was a clone, because if she was genetically related to her surrogate mother, she would have had a black face. Dolly was important because she was the first mammal to be cloned from an adult cell. Her birth proved that specialized cells could be used to create an exact copy of the animal they came from. Dolly was the first ever cloned mammal. That honor belonged. Dolly was not the first ever cloned mammal. That honor belongs to another sheep, which was cloned from an embryo cell and born in 1984 in Cambridge, UK. Two other sheep, Megan and Morig, had also been cloned from embryonic cells grown in the lab at the Roslin Institute in 1995, and six other sheep cloned from embryonic and fetal cells were born at Roslin at the same time as Dolly. Dolly was announced to the world on February 22nd, 1997, to a frenzy of media attention. When Dolly was 1 year old, analysis of her DNA showed that her telomeres were shorter than would be expected for a normal sheep of the same age. Telomeres are caps on the ends of DNA molecules that protect the DNA from damage. As an animal or person ages, their telomeres become progressively shorter, exposing the DNA to more damage. This could have meant that Dolly was older than her actual age. Test tube babies versus clones by Arthur Kaplan, PhD, NBCnews.com. 25 years ago, one of the most revolutionary events in the history of mankind took place. A little girl named Louise Brown was the first person ever created outside a woman's body. The world's first test tube baby arrived. Many, such as Leon Kass, who is today the chair of President Bush's Council on Bioethics, argued that creating people by means of in vitro fertilization, mixing sperm and eggs in a glass dish, test tubes were never actually used, was morally wrong. Brown was born. She was a happy, healthy infant, and her parents were thrilled. She seemed as natural a baby as had ever entered the world. IVF took off and never looked back. Cloning is a different story. Nearly 90% of clones fail to develop into live-born animals, and among those that are born into the world alive, a huge number have serious or fatal medical problems. To this day, no one in the general public has ever seen a picture of Brown as an adult. The Harvard Gazette, Science and Technology. Harvard scientists revealed a genetic roadmap to building an entire organism from a single cell. Kevin Jiang, HMS Communications, 2018. Whether a worm, a human, or a blue whale, all multicellular life begins as a single-celled egg. From this solitary cell emerges the galaxy of others needed to build an organism. This feat is one of the most remarkable in the natural world, and despite decades of study, a complete understanding of the process has eluded biologists. Every cell in a developing embryo carries within it a copy of the organism's complete genome. Science Daily. How a single cell gives rise to the 37 trillion cells in an average adult. 2021, Yale University. One of the great mysteries of human biology is how a single cell can give rise to 37 trillion cells contained in the average body, each with its own specialized role. Scientific American, the sciences. The first human cloned embryo. Cloned early stage human embryos and human embryos generated only from eggs in a process called parthenogenesis now put therapeutic cloning within reach. 2001. They were such tiny dots, yet they held such immense promise. Insignificant as they appeared, the specks were precious because they were, to our knowledge, the first human embryos produced using the technique of nuclear transplantation, otherwise known as cloning. We hope to coax the early embryos to divide into hollow spheres of 100 or so cells called blastocysts. We intended to isolate human stem cells from the blastocysts to serve as the starter stock for growing replacement nerve, muscle, and other tissues that might one day be used to treat patients with a variety of diseases. Only one of the embryos progressed to the 6-cell stage, at which point it stopped dividing. In a similar experiment, however, we succeeded in prompting human eggs on their own, with no sperm to fertilize them to develop parthogenetically into blastocysts. We believe that together these achievements, the details of which we reported November 25th in the online journal eBiomed, the Journal of Regenerative Medicine, represents the dawn of a new age in medicine by demonstrating that the goal of therapeutic cloning is within reach. We launched our attempt to create a cloned human embryo in early 2001. In the basic nuclear transfer technique, scientists use an extremely fine needle to suck the genetic material from a mature egg. They then inject the nucleus of the donor cell, or sometimes a whole cell, into the enucleated egg and incubate it under special conditions that prompt it to divide and grow. The cloning process also appears to reset the aging clock in cloned cells, so that the cells appear younger in some ways than the cells from which they were cloned. We are continuing our therapeutic cloning experiments to generate cloned or parthenogenetically produced human embryos that will yield stem cells. Scientists have only begun to tap this important resource. That was from Scientific American. Let's shake it. History. July 25th, 1978. World's first test tube baby born. On July 25th, 1978, Louise Joy Brown, the world's first baby to be conceived via in vitro fertilization, is born at Oldham and District General Hospital in Manchester, England. Before giving birth to Louise, Leslie Brown had suffered years of infertility. A mature egg was removed from one of her ovaries and combined in a laboratory dish with her husband's sperm to form an embryo. The embryo then was implanted into her uterus a few days later. This is from CBS News. Eve, first human clone, or Eve, first human clone. A scientist's announcement Friday that her group had produced the first cloned human being. The 7-pound baby was born Tuesday by cesarean section and will be home in 3 days. And Brigitte Boisselier, a chemist and CEO of Clonade, the company that did the experiment. Boisselier said the baby dubbed Eve by the scientists is a clone of a 31-year-old American woman. CBSnews.com. We know from farm animals that they've had problems with their neurological systems, that they've had tumors, and they've had problems of premature aging. Cloning produces a new individual using only one person's DNA. Scientists remove the genetic material from an unfertilized egg, then introduce new DNA from a cell of the animal to be cloned. So far, scientists have succeeded in cloning sheep, mice, cows, pigs, goats, and cats. Many scientists say cloning is too risky because of abnormalities seen in cloned animals. So far, scientists have succeeded in cloning sheep, mice, cows, pigs, goats, and cats. Cows, pigs, goats. Cows, pigs, goats. The process of cloning could involve the creation and destruction of human embryos on a massive scale, says the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. 2 of the couples are using preserved cells taken from their own children before their deaths. And 1 is a lesbian couple, she said. NPR, Human Clones, Where's Baby Eve? 2003, Joe Palca, Human Clones, Where's Baby Eve? NPR.org. Clonade CEO Brigitte Boisselier, at a December 2002 news conference in Florida, claimed the company had delivered the world's first human clone, a baby girl called Eve. Several fertility doctors around the world maintain they are planning to clone a human baby. A year later, Boisselier, who directs a company set up by the Raelian religious sect, has offered no proof that the baby Eve exists, let alone that she is a clone. PMC, 2004. Korean scientists clone 30 human embryos. Tim Radford. South Korean scientists based at the Seoul National University, derived a line of pluripotent embryo stem cells from one of 30 cloned blastocysts created by somatic cell nuclear transfer. They had created the first human cloned embryos. The team was led by Woo-Suk Wang of the university's veterinary college and Shin Young Moon, a gynecologist. Our goal is not to clone humans, but to understand the causes of disease. Our goal is not to clone humans, but to understand the causes of disease. And in understanding the causes of disease, you'll be cloning humans. ncbi.nim.nih.gov. Our goal is not to clone humans, but to understand the causes of disease. And how will we understand the causes of disease? By cloning humans. The scientists used 242 eggs from 16 women donors. They derived 30 blastocysts and from these tried 20 times to produce a line of embryo stem cells. They ended up with just one line of stem cells cultivated from a blastocyst that had been cloned from nuclear material taken from cumulus cells belonging to the woman who had donated the egg in the first place. NPR, Health News, scientists clone human embryos to make stem cells. 2013, Rob Steen. Michaeline Duclef. Scientists say they have for the first time cloned human embryos capable of producing embryonic stem cells. The experiments involve creating and then destroying humans for research purposes. The experiments involve creating and then destroying humans for research purposes. In this week's issue of the journal Cell, Mitilipov's team reported they finally did it in humans. Researchers recruited women who were willing to provide eggs for the research. They finally found the best way to stimulate each egg so that it would develop into an embryo without the need to be fertilized with sperm. A combination of chemicals and an electric pulse. As it turned out, that perfect combination included something surprising: caffeine. The resulting embryos could develop. The stem cells could be turned into other types of cells, including heart cells. The resulting embryos could develop. The stem cells could be turned into other types of cells, including heart cells. The Oregon researchers compensated women financially to donate eggs. The creation and destruction of a human is repugnant. This is a case in which one is deliberately setting out to create a human being for the sole purpose of destroying that human being, says Dr. Daniel Sumasi, a professor of medicine and a bioethicist at the University of Chicago, of all places. Popular science. Scientists create first cloned human embryo. Human cloning has arrived. You the original or you the copy? Do the right thing.